Good friend Mike McAllister from QStation.com. Mike, how are things?
I'm doing better than Paulie, apparently. So,
yes.
But I'm doing okay.
All right. He asked me a question earlier in the show. I'll ask you the same question. He said, do you take anything away from the Virginia game? And I said just the way that they're kind of playing with a purpose right now, or still playing with a purpose, given that, maybe there's not a lot to play for from the outside looking in. That's the one thing I took away. What about you? You take anything away from the Virginia game or the way they've been playing of late in general?
Yeah, I think the last 5 or 6 games they've had double-digit leads, I think, in at least 5 straight games, something like that. And what I kind of take away from it is, I think obviously the way the season has gone is not what anyone wanted or expected or anything else. But if you're trying to evaluate the job that a coach is doing, and there's plenty to be critical of, right? But I do think something that is on the positive side is that Red hasn't lost the locker room, because if he had, then I don't think they have double-digit leads in 5 straight games, and they wouldn't have won on senior day, beaten NC State in a game that was important to get to the postseason and all those things. So I do think it tells you a little bit of something as far as how Red connects with the players. And that's, I think, something you can take as a positive going into next season, barring, of course, some sort of, 30, 40-point loss in the ACC tournament, which, I don't think anyone is expecting at this point.
All right, the voting was due yesterday for All-ACC teams, and the way it works, as you well know, you vote for 15, and then, first 5 go on the first team, second 5 go on the second team, third 5 go on the third team. Do you think Eddie Lampkin did enough to land on, in the top 15? You think he's like a third-team All-ACC selection this year, or do you think SU gets shut out?
I think you can make a strong argument for him. Now, I haven't done enough studying as far as how the other bigs in the conference are doing. I know from a defensive standpoint, certainly he's not going to have anything numbers-wise to get him up there, but one of the best double-double guys in the conference. I think probably the first guy on the scouting report when teams play against Syracuse is we got to try to limit that guy. He's had a bunch of huge games. So, yeah, I think it would be a worthy selection of him, sneaking into a third-team all-conference selection.
Do you think that we were talking about whether or not this team has found anything over the course of the last, 5 games or so, and, you mentioned the way they're playing and how hard they're playing, and I agree with that. From an X's and O's standpoint, do you think that they've figured anything out? Whether it's, the way that they pressured Virginia full court defensively, or, the way that it seems like they've made it more of a priority to get Jair Davis involved of late, and, they're feeding Lampkin in the post. Do you think they've figured anything out over the course of the last couple of weeks?
I think from an offensive standpoint, what they figured out is that their best option is to play through the post and play off of that, as opposed to trying to play through like JJ driving and dishing, for example. I think they're at their best when they're going through Lampkin and Davis in the post. They do have an advantage on most teams with their size and physicality from an offensive standpoint, because there aren't a lot of teams that play that way anymore. And so I think that does give Syracuse something that it can have as an advantage going into a lot of games. That's something I think they figured out, because there were stretches of the season where it seemed like they were shooting a lot of threes, and the number of threes that they've taken over the last couple of weeks has significantly decreased, and with that, the percentage has gone up a little bit. They're only taking it when they're really good looks, or obviously, late shot clock situations. But the fact that they've done that offensively, defensively, I think they are what they are from a defensive standpoint for the most part. But what I did see against Virginia is I saw better energy on that end of the floor more consistently throughout the game, as opposed to seeing it for, a 5 or 6 minute stretch against Pittsburgh and then almost non-existent the rest of the game, things like that.
Now, yeah, go ahead.
That's just kind of where I'm at with it. I think they're a flawed defensive team, but if they're giving consistent effort for the full 40 minutes, then they can make enough plays on that end to give themselves a chance to win.
Now, when you finish as the 14 seed, you're obviously going to have to pull some upsets if you're going to make a run. So I'm not suggesting that, that they're in a good spot at all. But if you could pick which part of the bracket to be in, you would much prefer to be in the bottom half and avoid Duke as long as you can. I was saying this to Paulie earlier, that of all the options that they could have faced, in this first round game, Virginia Tech, Notre Dame, Pittsburgh, those kinds of teams, Florida State would have been probably my last choice, given that they don't match up great with them. But again, I mean, there's a path there that if they can, I feel like all these teams are kind of the same, right? So I'm curious to get your thoughts on the draw and whether or not you think Syracuse is capable anyway of making a little bit of noise.
Yeah, I agree with you. I thought their best chance at trying to make a run was avoiding Duke as long as possible because, like you, basically from spot 5 through 14, 15, I think everyone is very beatable and everybody can beat everybody. When you start getting into, having to play Duke or even, Louisville, Clemson, when you're playing those teams, then I think, you're going to have to pull off a pretty substantial upset, obviously Duke more so than anyone else. But if you can win this first game and get a little bit of momentum, kind of going into the second round game, then really you never know. So that's kind of the biggest thing is they're matching up with SMU, I believe, if they win the first game. So that's a team that even though they didn't play their best and they certainly missed a lot of free throws, but Syracuse also let that one slip away. They outplayed them for a large stretch of that game, and I think would go into that saying, we know that we can play with these guys. So, yeah, there's an opportunity there that they could win a couple of games, and then if you do that, you just kind of see where you're at, and then at that point you're going to have to pull off a substantial upset. But I think all things considered, if they were to make a little bit of a run like that, get to the quarterfinals with a couple of wins, I think you'd feel like they represented themselves well, given the way the season has gone.
I asked Mike Waters this question kind of off air as we get ready for our TV show tonight, and I said, do you see a dark horse, outside of the top three? Because you mentioned, Duke and Clemson and Louisville. Is there a team outside of that top three that you could see making a legitimate run in this ACC tournament? And, his response to me was essentially, it's hard, right? It's hard to come up with somebody outside that top three that's good enough to make a run. I'll ask you the same question. Do you think there's a dark horse? Would you consider North Carolina a dark horse in this tournament? Or do you think it's really going to be a tournament that's dominated by those top 2 or 3 teams?
I think it's probably going to be dominated by those top 3 teams, but if I had to pick a team that could make a little bit of a surprise run, I think North Carolina is the one that's probably the most talented and able to do that. Everyone else has very significant flaws. Now, SMU does have a really good lead guard, and so can he get hot and they can get rolling? They got some size inside as well, potentially. But I think ultimately it's those top 3 teams are heads and shoulders above pretty much everyone else. But I could see a scenario where, because North Carolina does have a lot of talent on this team, that, you have a couple of guys like an RJ Davis and someone else, Withers, whoever it is, getting hot and potentially going on a run. I could see something like that happening, but I don't think it's set up where you could have, a 7, 8, 9, 10 seed similar to NC State last year making a run to the championship game without something absolutely crazy happening.
And with that being said, it leads nicely into my next question, which is, this Syracuse team is not going to win the ACC tournament. This is going to be over in the next few days. It might be over tomorrow night, might be a few days before it's over. But when it's over, the attention turns to the offseason. Any thoughts on guys they might target? And I know it's early and there's some, predicting involved in terms of who would be in the portal, but is there any thought from your standpoint, from a recruiting standpoint, in the portal of guys they might be targeting?
I know the last time that we spoke, we made a comment about Jaleel Bethea from Miami, and he's not to say that that's a guy Syracuse is going to go after, but guys of his ilk, meaning very highly touted recruit, former McDonald's All-American, someone Syracuse did recruit out of high school. I understand that Jerry McNamara was the lead on him, but even still, and someone who's looking to leave their current situation, that's the type of thing that I would at least look at first, and then ultimately you look at positions of need, right? They could potentially be in the market for a point guard. So do they look at that guard from Lemoyne that announced he's going to be in the transfer portal? Is he someone that they look at? 6'2", 6'3" guard, good passer, good shooter from the outside, et cetera. But otherwise, names-wise, I don't specifically have names, but I do think point guard, big, and then depending on who else leaves, you could potentially be in the market for a big or a shooting guard potentially.
Speaking of recruiting and speaking of names, there was a very familiar name linked to Syracuse football over the weekend, right? Donovan McNabb Jr. Bring us up to date on football recruiting and anything that we need to be aware of from that area.
Yeah, he's a class of 2027 wide receiver. He also has several other power conference offers: Arizona, Iowa State, Minnesota. Arizona State's also after him. He plays his high school ball in Arizona, but he had a conversation with Coach Fran and picked up an offer, and he's extremely excited. Obviously, we know the connection with his dad who played here, but his mom also played on the women's basketball team, and his sister is currently on the women's basketball team. He said he's been to Syracuse a bunch of times because of all those family connections. So obviously you would figure Syracuse will be pretty heavily involved with his recruitment going forward. Otherwise, they're going to have visitors on campus over the next several weeks during spring ball, but we're really gearing up for what's going to be a pretty big summer for Syracuse football. They have, I think, somewhere between 6 and 8 4-star prospects that currently have official visits scheduled for the month of June, and then a bunch of other priority, highly rated 3-star prospects that are going to be visiting as well. So it's going to be a very busy summer for Fran Brown and the coaching staff. As they've currently got the 15th ranked recruiting class in 2026. And if they land, a decent amount of those 4-stars that are visiting, they've got a real good chance of having the first top 25 recruiting class in Syracuse football history, at least since the recruiting services have been around for the last 25 years or so.
All right, Mike, great stuff as always. We appreciate you coming on. Enjoy your week.